Hello, Ross here from Primal Academy. Head Academy trainer Jim is taking you through the do's and don'ts of the kettlebell swing today. It's a very easy exercise to think you know what you're doing without learning the proper mechanics. Plus, it's pretty much the mainstay of kettlebells. It's what you need to know in order to progress in kettlebells in any way, shape or form. If you like what you learn from Jim, check out the free Primal Academy membership by clicking the link below where there's tons more videos just like this one.
Okay, so our last training module, the kettlebell swing, our biggest, most important exercise when it comes to training with this bit of kit. So first of all, just a quick demo so you can see what the kettlebell swing should look like when you're using it or when you're practicing it. So if we were starting from the floor, pulling it up into the swing, sending it straight out to shoulder height. And down. So a quick demo of what the movement should look like there. Now, just a couple of quick points regarding basic mechanics of that exercise. As you can clearly see, it's a very fast movement, and my speed is actually determined by, firstly, how fast I can push it off my hips. But on the way back down, there's no effort for me. I'm relaxing. Gravity is pulling it down in a pendulum-based swing. So the movement itself is actually a full contraction, relax, full contraction, and relax. And that is going to be the basic starting point for the kettlebell swing. Now, as I'm sure you're aware from earlier in the physiology episode, we are doing a posterior chain movement. So the kettlebell swing is a hip hinge movement, which means it is predominantly hamstrings, glutes, and our back that are going to be the prime movers for this. Although there are obviously a lot of stabilizing muscles helping us out along the way there. Now, the kettlebell swing, obviously the tempo is set. I push it up and gravity pulls it back down. I can't really change that too much unless I interfere. So it is in effect a plyometric exercise. So plyometrics, if you're not aware, is when we use a bouncing, a bounding or a jumping pattern to create a stretch shortening cycle. So using one movement to generate power into the next one. So that is what a kettlebell swing is doing. I'm using the gravity of the weight to pull my hamstrings into a stretch. I use that stretch to immediately fire it back out with all the power I can manage. So with that in mind, depending on how heavy you are and how strong your hamstrings are, you are going to need a certain weight to allow that to happen. So for example, if I pick up this 8-kilo kettlebell, which is what a lot of people would instinctively pick up to learn a new movement, that makes sense. With a kettlebell swing, it doesn't actually work. This kettlebell, it's not heavy enough to pull me in my hamstrings into a taut stretch that I can then use to generate that power. So although we can use this movement to practice our hip hinge when we're practicing our stiff leg deadlifts and our traditional deadlifts, I can't actually use that to learn a kettlebell swing. It's not heavy enough to practice it properly. It goes in the bin. Blue kettlebell, depending on how light yourself or the client is, we might be able to get away with it, but again, it's still just a little bit light. It's not going to pull me into the right tempo. If the tempo is wrong, the whole movement is wrong with the swing. I would traditionally get people to start off with a 16-kilo kettlebell, depending on their size and their stature. So with that in mind, we're going to look at the kettlebell swing in a little bit more in-depth position. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a hip hinge movement. So hip hinge is posterior chain. It's when our hips go backwards. That normally, in effect, pulls our torso down. It is completely separate to a squat pattern. So our hip hinge, the leg, the knees are significantly less involved, although they are involved a small amount, compared to a squat, which is significantly more knee dominant. Now, how we typically see in the gym a kettlebell swing when it is wrong, in effect, is when people are squatting the kettlebell swing. So just a quick demo of what that would look like. So traditional kettlebell swing should be hips back, hips forwards. What we do tend to see a fair amount of is this movement where my whole height changes, my knees bend, I sit down into it, and if I did a long round of that, instead of feeling the burn, if you like, in the back of the hamstrings and the glutes, which is where I should be feeling it, would actually feel like my quads are getting a really nice burn from that. Probably the movement isn't quite working properly there. That is traditionally much more knee dominant. That is probably a squat that you are training there. When you're doing our kettlebell swing, your hips, if they were next to a rule or stood upright, they should stay basically at the same height. Compared to a squat movement, as the knees bend, the hips drop down. So that is typically the difference between the two. If you feel the burn here, you're probably squatting. If you're getting on the hamstrings, you're probably doing it a bit better. So let's just start off the kettlebell from scratch. I'm going to demo with a nice light weight so I don't tire myself out. Starting from a standing position is the easiest place to learn from. I start with it on one leg, and that all just allows me to kick it forwards so I can start swinging. So I'm going to hold it with two hands, I kick it in, and I just follow the kettlebell to start with. I don't need to use too much power. I just want to get that pendulum movement going right. So my hips go back, then I push my hips forwards as hard as I can, ideally until we're hitting about shoulder height at the top. And when we're done, I control it and I can put it back down. So a couple of minor points there. You can see I'm not really lifting with my arms. I'm keeping my shoulder blades pulled back into position. Ideally not too much of a gap at the armpit. That's going to keep my shoulders better protected, keep my grip stronger. And I'm also not bending my elbows too much. You will see people doing this on the kettlebell swing sometimes. That's a different variation, typically that sport people do with kettlebells. So for now, we're doing power work. I want to keep it pretty much at that arm's length away from me. Next point is the breathing. So you can probably hear when I'm doing the swings, I'm doing two very quick breaths at the bottom, not really breathing too much at the top. So the tempo is going to be breathe out, breathe out, breathe out, breathe out. And your breathing in will come, your body will make you breathe it in between those. So I breathe out as the weight comes in, and I breathe out as I push the weight away. So again, those are pretty quick succession. So quick demo. That's the tempo that we want, and that is showing you where the effort of the kettlebell swing is. There's effort involved in the eccentric phase of taking the weight in. I need to breathe out for that. There's effort involved, obviously, at pushing the weight back out again. So I need to breathe out for that section. So that is why it's a very quick double breath at the bottom of that swing there. As you can also see while I'm doing the swing, obviously, like a good deadlift, I'm trying to keep my lower back nice and flat. So make sure those shoulders are staying pulled back, and we're keeping the hips back. That's going to be our nice little flat back position. I don't want our back and our shoulders rounding over. From here, obviously, we should be aware by now that isn't going to be a good position for our back to sit in. And the last point, which no one makes the kettlebell swing more comfortable for people and less pulling the back out, is actually how high you have your hands. When you're doing your kettlebell swing, it should be basically as close to your crotch as possible. Simple as that. So my hands, I want to be as tight up into my upper thigh as they can be, as opposed to what we do see, which is swinging with your forearms coming down by your knees. Now, just the very simple mechanics of having my arms lower, that will naturally pull my shoulders over further and make me round over at the lower back. And it also means I can't generate as much power because the mass of the kettlebell is moved much further away from my center of gravity. I want it to be as close to my hips as possible because the hips are what are generating the swing effort in itself. So keep it as tight up into your inner thigh as possible. And we don't need to swing chest to parallel with the floor, but I also don't want to do a tiny micro swing. It's very hard to get people to find that middle position. About 45-degree angle of the chest, so I do want some hip movement and torso to come down and back up again. I don't want it going all the way through where my hamstrings want to rip off. I also don't want to do the tiny micro swing where I'm not actually allowed the hamstring to lengthen effectively. So somewhere in that middle point is what we're going to look for. The last little bit, and I'll stop talking about kettlebell swings for a while, is going to be how we start it from the floor. So that would be our traditional hack position. Hack swing just means instead of starting it from the hip, I start with it on the ground in front of me. I sit back into the position, back nice and straight, and as I stand up, I drag it in to the kettlebell swing. I have to make sure I stand as I pull it in to make sure I don't swing with my forearms to the knees like I mentioned before. And you might want to start with a little bit of a jump. So people traditionally find it easy to learn If they stand over the kettlebell like they're about to do a deadlift and they hop backwards, and as their heels come down, we pull it into that position there. So that'd be like a jumping hack position. That's just a little bit easier for people to learn because they get a bit more momentum. Starting it about 2 feet in front of you, this is going to require a little bit more strength now. So again, one more time, which we should practice. Sit your hips back, take hold of the kettlebell, stand up and pull it back into the swing and send it straight out to shoulder height. And it just means we don't have to waste energy doing the tiny little baby swings until we're getting to shoulder height at the top. Next up, we'll have a look at the single arm swing and the hand-to-hand change, which is how we're going to use the cleans and our advanced exercises later on.